It is 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun is not merely shining, it is punishing. Your air conditioner has been running since 9 in the morning. You can hear it, a constant mechanical hum that has become the background sound of your summer. Yet when you walk through the hallway, the air hits you like a warm blanket. The room your children sleep in holds heat like an oven. You press your hand against the ceiling and it is warm to the touch. Not just warm, hot. Every evening, you tell yourself the same thing. Tomorrow, I will fix this. Every month, the electricity bill arrives, and the number on it chips away at something more than your budget. It chips away at your confidence that anything can actually change. This is not a problem of your AC unit being old or underpowered. This is not a problem of your home being poorly built. This is a problem of being lied to, not by any single company or contractor, but by an entire industry that has quietly agreed on what counts as a solution and what does not. The great insulation myth. For decades, the conversation about home insulation has revolved around a single number, the R value. You have seen it on packaging, heard it from contractors, perhaps even read it in a government energy guide. R value measures thermal resistance, how well a material slows the transfer of heat by conduction. Higher R value, we are told, means better insulation. And fiberglass bats, those familiar rolls of pink fluffy material, have been marketed as the definitive answer to summer heat. Walk into any hardware store this summer. Ask someone where the insulation is, and they will walk you past the plumbing fixtures, past the roofing supplies, and plant you in front of a wall of pink and yellow rolls. They will hand you a package that says R13 or R19 or R30, and tell you with complete confidence that the higher the number, the cooler your home will be. They believe it. The industry believes it. It is printed on millions of packages and recommended by thousands of well-meaning contractors every single day. It is also fundamentally, structurally incomplete, and the gap between what is true and what is being sold is costing homeowners billions of dollars every year in wasted energy, not to mention the misery of hot, sleepless summers despite having done everything they were told. The sponge in a flood. Here is the analogy that explains everything. Imagine a massive flood is coming, not a drizzle, not a garden hose, but a full-scale wall of water rushing toward your house. Someone hands you a giant sponge and tells you it will protect your home. The sponge is excellent at absorbing water. It has a very high absorption rating. The problem, of course, is that when the flood arrives, it overwhelms the sponge entirely. The water does not stop. It simply keeps coming until the sponge is saturated and then flows right past it. Fiberglass insulation is that sponge, and summer heat is not a drizzle, it is a flood. But here is where the analogy needs one more layer of accuracy. Summer heat is not even water. Summer heat is light. The sun bombards your roof with radiant energy, electromagnetic radiation traveling at the speed of light. This energy does not need a medium to travel through. It does not conduct through your roof tiles the way a cold metal spoon conducts temperature into your hand. It radiates. It transfers as pure energy, absorbed by dark surfaces and re-emitted as heat directly into your attic space. From there, it radiates downward through your ceiling and into your living space. Fiberglass insulation is designed to slow conductive heat transfer, the kind that moves molecule to molecule through solid material. It does this reasonably well. What it cannot do, what it was never designed to do, is stop radiant energy. And here is the number that should fundamentally change how you think about your home. Studies consistently show that between 65% and 80% of summer heat gain in a home comes from radiant energy, not conduction. That means fiberglass insulation, even the highest R-value product you can buy, is addressing somewhere between 20% and 35% of your actual summer heat problem. You are putting a sponge in a flood of light. The R-value blind spot. This brings us to the deception. not a conspiracy in the dramatic sense, but something arguably more insidious because it is institutional. The R-value rating system measures only conductive resistance. It does not measure reflectivity. It does not measure the ability of a material to reject radiant energy before it enters your home. The entire rating standard, the one printed on every package, the one used to determine tax credits and building codes and contractor recommendations, is blind to the dominant mechanism of summer heat transfer. The insulation industry, a sector worth over $60 billion globally, has built itself around a metric that was never designed to evaluate summer performance. This is not because the science is unclear. The science has been understood for decades. It is because reorienting an industry around a new measurement, especially one that might undermine existing products, is expensive and complicated, and nobody is forced to do it. So the pink rolls keep selling, the R values keep climbing, R38, R49, R60, and homeowners keep installing them. And summers keep getting hotter inside their homes, and the electricity bills keep rising, and every contractor who recommends more fiberglass is not lying. They are repeating what they were taught, quoting a number that feels authoritative, offering a solution that genuinely helps with part of the problem while remaining completely silent about the rest. The blind spot is not in the walls of your home. It is in the measurement system you were given to evaluate them. In 1959, the engineers working on what would eventually become the American space program faced a problem that no one in the history of construction or manufacturing had ever encountered at scale. They needed to protect human beings and sensitive equipment from temperatures that existed in no terrestrial context whatsoever. Space is not merely cold. Space is a place where the side of a spacecraft facing the sun can reach plus 250 degrees, while the side facing away from the sun simultaneously experiences 250 degrees Celsius, 157 degrees C. These are not gradients. They are coexisting extremes separated by a few inches of material, and the mechanism responsible for both conditions is identical: radiation. Radiant energy from the sun superheats one surface, while the complete absence of atmospheric insulation allows the other surface to radiate its own heat into the void, dropping to temperatures that would shatter steel. Fiberglass was useless in this environment, not inadequate, useless. It has mass, it has thickness, and it addresses a form of heat transfer that is practically irrelevant. In a vacuum, where there are no molecules to conduct through, the physics of space stripped the problem to its essentials, and what remained was pure, radiant energy transfer, completely unaddressed by any conventional insulation technology available at the time. The 1959 breakthrough, the solution that NASA's engineers and affiliated researchers developed, was elegant in its simplicity and revolutionary in its implications. If radiant energy travels as light and is absorbed by dark surfaces, then the answer is a surface that does not absorb it, one that reflects it, a highly polished, aluminized film, thin enough to add almost no mass to a spacecraft, could reflect more than 95% of incident radiant energy. This was the birth of what we now call the radiant barrier. The technology was incorporated into Apollo mission spacecraft and, perhaps most visibly, into the emergency thermal blankets, those crinkly silver sheets that are still used by emergency responders today. It was woven into the fabric of spacesuits, layered inside lunar module walls, and tested under conditions that made a Pakistani summer look temperate by comparison. The performance data was extraordinary. In environments where fiberglass insulation offered nothing, a layer of aluminized film maintained habitable temperature differentials. The physics underlying this performance is not complicated, though it is often poorly communicated. Every material has a property called emissivity, its tendency to emit thermal radiation. A dark, rough surface has high emissivity and radiates heat readily. A polished aluminum surface has an emissivity near 0.03, meaning it emits less than 3% of the thermal radiation that a perfect emitter would produce at the same temperature. When radiant heat strikes such a surface, instead of being absorbed and re-emitted into the space behind it, it is bounced back toward its source. Applied to a home, this means that a radiant barrier installed in the attic, typically a layer of reflective foil attached to the underside of roof rafters, or laid across attic insulation, reflects the sun's radiant energy back before it has a chance to heat the attic air and the building materials beneath. The attic temperature in a home with a radiant barrier can be 20 degrees to 30 degrees, 11 degrees to 17 degrees, lower than in an identical home without one on the same afternoon. The downstream effect on air conditioning load, and therefore electricity consumption, is substantial and measurable. From orbit to Earth. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, the technology remained largely within aerospace and military applications. It was expensive to produce, required careful handling, and the manufacturing infrastructure for large-scale residential use did not exist. But by the late 1970s and early 1980s, as the energy crisis sharpened public and governmental interest in building efficiency, researchers at the Florida Solar Energy Center and other institutions began conducting rigorous field studies on radiant barriers applied to residential construction. The results, published in peer-reviewed engineering journals and compiled into reports for the Department of Energy, were consistent and compelling. Radiant barriers in hot climates demonstrated cooling season energy savings in the range of 8% to 17% in tested homes. And here is the critical detail that the studies also captured. In homes where the radiant barrier was combined with properly sealed attic penetrations and installed under optimal conditions, AC runtime reductions of up to 60% were documented during peak afternoon hours. The 8% to 17% figure represents total monthly bill reduction. The runtime reduction during the brutal noon to 6 p.m. window, the hours that determine whether your home is livable, is a different and far more dramatic number. In extremely hot climates, the American South, the Gulf region, the Indian subcontinent, the technology showed particular promise because radiant heat gain is the dominant challenge for the majority of the year. By the late 1980s, the technology had matured enough that manufacturing costs had dropped significantly. Several companies had begun producing radiant barrier products specifically for residential and commercial construction. The Florida Building Code had begun recognizing radiant barriers as a compliance pathway for energy efficiency requirements. Industry publications were carrying articles about the technology. Trade conferences were discussing it. There was a genuine building momentum toward mainstream adoption. And then, between 1989 and 1991, something happened that people within the alternative insulation industry still discuss in careful, measured terms: the burial. The fiberglass insulation industry, led by its major manufacturers and represented through trade associations and lobbying efforts, mounted a systematic campaign to challenge radiant barrier science at the regulatory and standards level. The campaign operated on multiple fronts simultaneously. At the standards body level, arguments were made that the testing methodology used to evaluate radiant barrier performance was flawed, that the laboratory conditions did not replicate real-world attic performance. These objections were technically sophisticated enough to generate years of debate within standards committees, effectively delaying formal recognition of the technology in building codes at the national level. At the contractor and builder education level, materials were circulated, questioning the claimed savings figures and the superior simplicity of the R-value framework. A single number, every contractor already understood, was reinforced as the appropriate way to think about insulation decisions. Continuing education for contractors, largely funded and developed by established manufacturers, did not incorporate radiant barrier technology into its curriculum in any meaningful way. At the consumer level, the absence of a familiar, simple metric like R-value made radiant barriers difficult to market against fiberglass in a retail setting. There was no R30 equivalent on the package. The technology required a different kind of explanation, one about emissivity and radiant heat transfer, that did not fit on a shelf label or a contractor's quick quote. By the early 1990s, the window of mainstream adoption had effectively closed. Radiant barriers did not disappear. They remained in use in Florida, Texas, and other hot climate markets where the case was too strong to ignore entirely, but they never achieved the national recognition that the research suggested they deserved. The $60 billion insulation industry, built on a metric that measures only part of the problem, had successfully defended its market. And homeowners, not knowing what questions to ask, kept buying rolls of pink fiberglass and wondering why their summers stayed so brutally, expensively hot. The science did not change. It was simply buried, not deep enough that it could never be found again, but deep enough that most people never thought to look. At some point, science has to stop being theoretical and start being a number on a bill. Everything discussed in the previous two parts, the physics of radiant energy, the NASA research, the industry suppression, means nothing to a homeowner standing in a sweltering bedroom at 11 o'clock at night, unless it translates into a temperature they can feel and a cost they can measure. So let us talk about a man in Phoenix, Arizona, and the $54 he spent on a Saturday morning that changed his entire relationship with summer. David Morrell was not an engineer or a building scientist. He was a logistics coordinator with a 1,400-square-foot home built in 1987, a 3.5-ton central air conditioning unit that his HVAC technician described as appropriately sized, and an electricity bill that had climbed to $340 in July. His attic had R30 fiberglass insulation, exactly what the building code required, exactly what every contractor he had ever spoken to had recommended. He tracked his AC runtime using a simple monitoring plug attached to his air handler. In July, before any intervention, his system was running an average of 4.5 hours per day during peak afternoon hours alone. That does not count the morning cycling or the nighttime recovery running. That is just the brutal afternoon window between noon and 6 p.m. He purchased 2 rolls of perforated radiant barrier foil from a building supply store. Total cost, $54. He spent one Saturday morning in his attic, starting at 6 a.m. before the heat became dangerous, stapling the foil to the underside of his roof rafters, shiny side facing down toward the attic floor. He did not remove his existing fiberglass insulation. He did not hire anyone. He did not rewire, replace, or upgrade a single component of his HVAC system. The following July, his average afternoon AC runtime had dropped to 1.8 hours per day. His electricity bill for that month was $187 lower than the previous year's equivalent. His attic temperature at 3 p.m., which he measured with a simple infrared thermometer before and after, had dropped from 158 degrees to 127 degrees. His upstairs bedroom, which had previously been uninhabitable in the afternoon without the AC running at full blast, was now what he described as just a normal room. One Saturday morning, $54, no contractor, no permit, no complicated technology, just physics applied correctly for the first time. To be precise about what these numbers mean, David's 60% reduction in afternoon AC runtime is exactly what the Florida Solar Energy Center's peak hour field research predicted, and it is the runtime reduction during those brutal afternoon hours that determines your electricity bill, your comfort, and your AC unit's lifespan. The monthly bill reduction of $187 represents a combination of that runtime savings and the nighttime improvement described below. Both numbers are real. They measure different things and both matter. Here is something that will make immediate sense once you hear it, and that you will never be able to unknow. You have probably noticed that even on evenings when the outdoor temperature drops to something reasonable, say 85 degrees at 10 p.m., your home still feels hot. The AC runs, the thermostat is set to something sensible, and yet the house holds a dense, radiating warmth that does not seem to respond to the cooling air being pumped into it. You blame the humidity. You blame the AC. You lie awake frustrated. What is actually happening is called thermal saturation, and your fiberglass insulation is causing it. Throughout the day, as radiant energy has bombarded your roof, it has been absorbed by your roofing material, transferred into your roof deck, and radiated into your attic air. Your fiberglass insulation has absorbed some of this heat. It is doing its job, slowing conductive transfer, but because it cannot reject the radiant energy before it enters the attic, the insulation itself, along with the wood framing, the attic floor, and every material up there, has absorbed an enormous thermal load throughout the day. Your attic has become a thermal battery, a massive slow-release heat storage system that has been charging since sunrise. By 10 p.m., the outdoor temperature has dropped, but your attic is still at 110 degrees, 120 degrees, or higher. All of that stored energy radiates downward through your ceiling, into your living space, continuously, through the night. Your air conditioner is not fighting the outdoor temperature anymore. It is fighting your own building materials, releasing the heat they absorbed 12 hours earlier. It is running against a problem that cannot be solved by cooling the air, because the heat source is not the air, it is the structure itself. A radiant barrier breaks this cycle at its source. By reflecting the sun's energy before it is absorbed by your roof deck and attic materials, it prevents the thermal battery from charging in the first place. Your attic materials never reach those extreme temperatures. By evening, there is no stored thermal load to release. The cycle that has been punishing you every night, the one your fiberglass insulation is physically incapable of addressing, simply does not occur. This is why homeowners who install radiant barriers frequently report that the nighttime improvement is even more dramatic than the daytime improvement. The physics is working in your favor around the clock, not just during peak sun hours. The step-by-step DIY guide. The installation process is straightforward enough that it requires no professional experience, no special tools beyond a staple gun and a utility knife, and no modifications to any existing system in your home. What it does require is care and attention to a few specific rules that determine whether the product performs as the science promises or becomes an expensive mistake. What to buy? Purchase perforated radiant barrier foil specifically, not standard aluminum foil, not vapor barrier sheeting, not the solid-faced radiant barrier products. The perforations are critical because they allow moisture vapor to pass through the material rather than accumulating behind it. A standard roll covers approximately 500 square feet and costs between $50 and $80 at most building supply stores. Measure your attic's rafter span area before purchasing. Rule number 1. Shiny side down, always. This is the single most important installation principle and the one most frequently misunderstood. The reflective surface needs to face the attic space below it. The air gap between the foil and your attic floor insulation is what allows the radiant reflection to function. When the foil is stapled to the underside of your roof rafters with the reflective face pointing downward, it reflects the radiant energy that has entered the attic back upward toward the roof deck rather than allowing it to radiate down into your living space. If you install it shiny side up, facing the roof deck, You have the physics exactly backwards, and the product will not perform as intended. The critical warning: never lay it flat on insulation. This is where well-meaning homeowners make a costly error. Some installation guides, particularly older ones, suggest simply unrolling the radiant barrier across the top of existing attic insulation like a blanket. Do not do this. When solid or even perforated radiant barrier is laid flat against a soft insulation surface, it creates conditions that trap moisture between the two layers. Over time, this leads to condensation, mold growth within your insulation, and structural damage to your attic floor. Problems that cost far more to remediate than any energy savings could offset. The correct method is rafter mounting. Cut strips to span from the ridge down to the top plate of your exterior walls, and staple them directly to the underside of each rafter, leaving the material hanging freely between rafters. This maintains the air gap necessary for radiant reflection and eliminates any moisture-trapping concern. Safety during installation. Work in the early morning before the attic heats up. Wear long sleeves, a respirator rated for particulates, safety glasses and knee pads. Bring a flashlight and, if possible, a portable work light. Step only on the ceiling joists or use a temporary board, never on the insulation or the drywall between joists. Have water with you. Set a hard time limit and leave the attic before conditions become dangerous. The final revolution. There is something clarifying about understanding for the first time exactly why a problem has persisted despite your best efforts to solve it. You were not doing anything wrong. You were simply working within a framework that was designed around a metric that measures the wrong thing, sold by an industry that had every financial incentive to keep that metric as the only conversation in the room. The R-value trap is not a small oversight. It is a structural feature of a $60 billion industry that successfully lobbied, educated and certified its way into becoming the default answer to every question about insulation, including questions the R-value framework was never capable of answering. The contractors who recommended more fiberglass were not corrupt. They were trained within a system that did not teach them what they were not taught, and there was no professional incentive to go looking. That changes now, at least for you and for everyone you choose to share this with. The solution costs $54. It is built on research that was rigorous enough to protect Apollo astronauts in conditions no earthly summer can match. It requires one Saturday morning, a staple gun, and the knowledge that the shiny side goes down. It does not require a permit, a contractor, a loan, or a replacement of any system in your home. Your attic will be cooler, your nights will be quieter, your electricity bill will reflect for the first time what your home actually needs to stay comfortable, not what it needs to fight a radiant heat load that should never have been allowed to build in the first place. Install it, measure your results, and then tell someone. Tell a neighbor whose window units run through the night. Tell a family member who has resigned themselves to suffering through summer as an unavoidable expense. Tell them that the answer existed in 1959, that it flew to the moon, and that it has been sitting in the building supply aisle, unlabeled, unexplained, and underestimated ever since. And one more thing. Next time, we are going to talk about a $7 powder that can push your energy savings even further. The radiant barrier stops the heat from getting in. What we discuss next stops what little remains from going anywhere at all.